All right, guys. Thank you very much for attending this session again for this year. So it's the third year in a row that we present the data center trend in Thailand and how it evolves over the past years, in fact. So this year is specifically intense for us because, I mean, when we look at what happened like 3 years ago compared to what is happening today, the market has totally changed and is going to change even more next year. So we are really at a tipping point. And that's why it's very interesting to have this session today and to analyze in more details, let's say, what are the key items in terms of investors coming in, new investors coming in, the new data centers that are entering the market, the new clients also that will be looking for capacity, and specifically new, of course, in terms of names in Thailand, but new in terms also of demand that are slightly different from what we've seen in the past. Lots of risk also, geopolitical, natural. I think the last 12 months we've seen an alignment of so many issues happening to Thailand, so it must be also super important for investors to take a good look at this before investing or when they want to invest, making sure that they cover those risks to make sure the investments will go through. Also one important point at the end will be the shortage that Thailand is going to face over the next 12 months. A shortage that was last year announced by our panelists, and that is currently happening now, and that will be even more stringent in the next 12 months. Like shortage of power, shortage of water. So all this will go through it today. We'll have the chance to have a great panelist again this year. So Carl from GLL that will be explaining a bit more about typically incoming demands that they foresee as a broker, like part typically important point to be checked on the land and on the water scarcity, etc. So all this will be checked carefully. Audrey from DFDL, which is a law firm specialized in data center industry also in Thailand, involved in a lot of power agreement. So very interesting to have also her insights in terms of what are the key points to be checked whenever you want to negotiate power incoming and making sure that the power that you have reserved is in fact being delivered to your site, which is also very important for customers whenever they want to take colocation space to your space. And Mr. Han from Schneider Electric will be talking specifically about the specificity of the new design that data centers have to respect in order to typically achieve what the clients are expecting to achieve. So it's totally different compared to what was the case like 5 years ago, for instance. So very interesting to also have his insight. And thank you again for attending the panel, three of you. So starting with the first part. So we have this year we have spread this into 4 parts. So the first one is regarding the supply boom. So Pauline, if you want to use the slide, that would be great. Thank you. And so that's the slide regarding the supply in Thailand. So this is 2025. So the new supply for 2026, you will have it in the white paper that we'll deliver after the session. But this one are the figures for 2025, which was already very important in terms of capacity. One thing that is quite amazing just to notice is like the number of BOI project that's been approved. So we are talking about 36 data center project. So 36 data center project for 2.4 gigawatt of capacity. Just to give you a comparison, if we look at the French market of data center, and as a French, of course I know that market, France data center market is for colocation 1.6, and we build it over 20 years. Thailand is 2.4 being lined up, that is going to be delivered over the next 4 years. So it's really important to take a step back, because these days people generally talk about crazy figures, saying, "Hey, I need 300 megawatt," like if it was easy to take. We're really talking about something absolutely massive that is hitting Thailand at the moment. So typically, to talk about this in more detail, the first question will be for you, Cal, and it's going to be trying to understand, because on the map we see that there is like a different region where we have data centers in the north, in Nonthaburi, in Bangkok city center, in Bangkok East, and in the EEC. Of course, the EEC is very known in this market, because that's where many data center projects are being built. But we foresee so many different places, so we would like to understand, is there a real difference between those places? Is there different kind of data centers, different kind of purposes that are serving the customer use case?
Sure, thanks very much, Pierre. I think what's clear is that there's two real different data center markets that we're seeing in Thailand. What we really focus on is Greater Bangkok, so Bangkok and into Samut Prakan, and then we focus on EEC, so Chachoengsao, Chonburi, and Rayong. What we're really seeing is that most of the retail co-locations are obviously wanting to be closer to Bangkok CBD. They need to be close to the internet exchange, the telco providers, and they need that low latency. Whereas when we look at the EEC, this is where we see the big hyperscalers, the US hyperscalers, Chinese hyperscalers who need 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts, 200 megawatt campuses, and even more than that with some of the clients that we're speaking to. So really for them, when they're focusing on large language modeling, AI, looking at large databases, obviously they don't need necessarily the same latency reaction as what we do when we look at Greater Bangkok. When we think as well with regards to who the operators are and who the developers are, is that there's also a clear differentiation as well. Majority of them either focus on retail co-location, so the likes of Equinix, for example, that is what they mainly focus on. And then in EEC, we have a lot of the hyperscalers who either self-build, or you have the likes of Bridge DC and Day One, who are obviously targeting these hyperscalers. Majority of these companies really focus on one or the other, but you do see the likes of maybe NTT and STT who might have a footprint in both.
Okay, so one interesting point is like we really foresee like a specificity in terms of strategy, really firmly being lined up nowadays, or because in the past, I would say the location was more wherever they could find a place with power and no real strategy to be implemented. So here today is like very specific. When they come to you, they are like, I am this kind of company and I'm not interested about that part, I'm interested about that part. Is it so like precise nowadays?
Yeah, so I think within JLL, our capital markets team, we have some colleagues who focus on the data centers looking at Bangkok and Greater Bangkok, and then we have other part of the team who are focusing on EEC. So even internally at JLL, we're splitting these different requirements that we're seeing. When I mention these hyperscalers, naturally they need huge land plots, they need massive amounts of power and water. So of course, most of them focus on EEC. About 80% of the industrial estates in Thailand are located in the EEC. It's easier for them to acquire these large land plots that have a lot of the infrastructure. It's easier for foreign ownership as well. So yes, definitely see a clear differentiation.
Okay, interesting. So like another point, which is also interesting to note, like we just said, okay, 2.4 gigawatt in the pipeline. But if we look at those figures for 2025, so it was 38 megawatt being live in the EEC, for instance. So more are being constructed, or is it, in fact, it's a question that we have also, and Audrey, happy to have your view. Is it construction being constructed typically, or is there a difference between BOI and confirmed project and live project? So do you foresee like some differences between those stages?
You are taking me out of the script. I need to improvise. Yeah, definitely, because I mean, and that's the whole and we will talk more about this, but that's a whole issue about how you synchronize your permitting process. So you may have the BOI approving, but then the practical issue is that even beyond the BOI, you might have your factory license, you might have everything you need, but the process in terms of your connection to the grid will anyway be separate. So these are two streams in parallel. And even before getting to that point where you are ready to connection, you have your commissioning phase, which is itself something that you manage with your engineers and so on. So you have these 3 to 4 different streams which are working not necessarily in an integrated manner. So the data you see in terms of statistics, in terms of this has been approved, this is constructed, and this is operational. It's not just category A, B, or C, because you have all these things in between, and that needs to be really super well coordinated with through an integrated program. And that the key issue is how you synchronize.
And I think maybe, sorry, just to add on that as well, is that we are speaking to a lot of clients who are maybe prepared to buy the land, hold it, they might get the BOI announcement, but ultimately, especially for the hyperscale developers, they're not going to start building these until they have the end user signed up. The cost to build these data centers is huge. I'm sure Schneider can cover that in a bit more detail, but ultimately, until they have the end user, they're not going to necessarily commit the capital to constructing these data centers.
Hey, interesting. So what you guys both are saying, like, first is not as simple as saying, okay, there is a stream that goes through steps. It's like many streams being addressed in parallel. And another point is, like, of course, investment for a data center is very important. And in order to justify the investment and to get the investors lined up, we need to have the anchor tenant being secured. Yeah. So both might make the entire investment phase a bit slower than expected. Okay. On Schneider Electric side, so really on the technical part, is there any other point that makes that, let's say, gap between what has been announced, what has been deployed, real? Is there technical constraints that are being addressed, or is there any other technical point that we don't foresee now?
Yeah, I think those some of the key points that I think the two panelists already mentioned, right, is, I mean, the numbers being numbers, but what is the numbers is all about, right? Hyperscaler, when they announce these numbers, they are actually doing a 10, 15 years planning ahead of time, right? So this is what they committed to the government and also for probably some incentive or tax incentive, right? But what is actually built, right, is not necessarily is what they want at the first day, right? They always, what I say, they must have tenant, they must have, interested customer that want to host data centers into their facilities, then they start to scale up, right? They may start with 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts, until probably 200 megawatts and so on. So this is where the numbers, there's a gaps in it, right? And also, just take note, right? All this data center demand capacity growth, it's happened only just 3 years ago when the AI just started, right, in 2022, right? And when this thing really started, all the utility company, data center operator is all put under a knee-jerk reaction. What happened, right? There's so much power needed for data centers, right? But utility company or power company, their infrastructure cannot be expanded so fast, right? Hyperscaler want their operator to build the data center for them in 1 year, in 1.5 years or 2 years, right? But for power company to build up substation, to build up transmission line, right? To clear land for all these substations to be constructed, they also need to go through what data center operator need to go through: tendering process, procurement process, bidding, and so on, right? They also need time to develop, right? Generation demand, they forecast 10 years ahead, but transmission, installation of transmission line, they probably need 3 to 5 years. And we are just in 3 years after 2022, right? So we will see that this gap may be coming closer, because utility company, they are also trying to learn the process, what's happening, right, from the last 3 years, right? They may call a tender that's bulk tender, that cover more area to develop transmission line substation, just to cater for this extra data center capacity, just to speed up the process. So I'll see the gap is there, right? But it will be closing out because every stakeholder are learning because of this AI boom coming up, right? They will speed up the process, and there will be more interaction between data center operator, hyperscaler, and even utility company working together, to make these data centers industry more sustainable.
So in fact, all the pipeline that we first see now, what you're saying is like there is two constraints in terms of delay for implementation. First is the data center itself that takes time to be built, and second is the public utility and especially the transmission lines that needs to be implemented. So which means that all this supply will ultimately be developed, but it will take times, and potentially, like when we hear clients asking for, I need this in 6 months, it will be potentially difficult to get that supply in 6 months. That's what you are saying.
Yep. I mean, it really depends. Now, operators, hyperscaler go to a location where where power is available, right? So that they can implement straight away, right? But if they can wait, right, they can actually work with utility company, right, to see what are the time duration they are expecting, right? As I mentioned earlier, utility company, since 2022, when the AI started, they also start to learn. They realize data centers is growing too fast. They even can't catch up the pace. Not just in Bangkok, anywhere in the world, right? For example, Singapore put a moratorium to stop building data centers. Even China, in UK, the government also slowed down the development of data centers because they want to look at policy, what is happening in this industry, because they are too intense, energy intensive and water intensive, right? They actually want to slow down the development of data centers, right? I think moving forward, everyone is learning, all the stakeholders are learning, operators, utility companies are learning, right? The gap will get smaller, right? The setup of utility infrastructure will be more robust in the near future, probably in the next 1 or 2 years. We'll be building faster and faster so that this gap will be closed up. And plus, bear in mind, a lot of construction is happening now, right? So this capacity probably will come closer again.
Maybe just to complement, nothing legal, but more, I would not say philosophical, but I think we are all misled by the fact that we are talking about data, which is intangible. But at the end of the day, all this is relying on physical infrastructure. And for anyone in this room who has experience in construction project, power, if you think of a power plant, yes, those projects take years because it relates to land. So people have rights over this land. You need to go through expropriation, you need to go through compensation, and then you have all the environmental issues. Yes, those things take a huge amount of time. So if you are the technical guy in the room, you think, okay, data center is not too sophisticated to build, should be done within 12 to 18 months max. But you miss the whole story because you need land, you need the infrastructure for the power, you need the infrastructure for the water. So I think the public and the political announcements which are floating everywhere when you watch the news are failing highlighting this, that this is infrastructure, physical stuff. So you need to, there is a pace that has to be sequential, and you cannot put things before the others.
Yeah, sure. And so, well, to be, so if we want to analyze this supply being built, what we understand from this infrastructure that takes time means that this will at some point of time will come, but we need at least 12 to 24 months to see that supply being live. Then Thailand will be ready with solid availability and available capacity within the next 12 to 24 months. That's your best guess, I guess?
That's true everywhere in the world, but in Thailand, like in other jurisdictions, there is an additional degree of difficulty because if we do a comparison with Europe or with US, the power sector is structured in a way which is still very much bundled. So the transmission is a monopoly under EGAT, the distribution is with PEA, and you do not have a fast interface between transmission, distribution, and generation. So there is almost a structural delay system in all this. It's not like everything can just be passed from A to B. There is this structural bundling that is not yet adapted to the pace of the needs. And that creates a difficulty. Plus the permitting pace, which, as we know in this jurisdiction, but that's the case also sometimes in Europe. And while Thailand has really fantastic fast-tracking system for some permitting, but it's not for all permittings. BUI is fast-track, EEC fast-track, easy, but what we are talking about for data center, it's not all fast-tracked. Again, if you have, for all these projects, you have to go, for a number of these projects, you have to do an environmental impact assessment. That may take 12 for 24 months. It depends. If you have a strong public opposition, then, and you cannot control all this. Land is another issue. If you need to build a new transmission line, an EGAT under the EGAT Act, which is a very old legislation of 1968. So EGAT has the statutory power to acquire land or to get a right of use under the transmission corridor. So that's, on paper, they could do fast. But the reality is very different, because if there is some sort of expropriation, or if you need to compensate people, and that's absolutely normal, but guess what? In Thailand, the compensation rates has not been updated for decades. So of course, people are like, you have a lot of disputes, because they are arguing that the value of the land at its value now is not at all has multiplied compared to the compensation rate as applicable under the regulation. So you have all these things happening behind the doors that, of course, create a lot of delays.
Okay, interesting to now that we have also understood that one important part of the decision-making process is to secure the anchor tenant. Typically, let's focus on who are those anchor tenants. Typically, who are the off-takers. So, like in the past news, we've seen that there have been an announcement of TikTok committing to invest 842 billion baht of investment in Thailand, which is the biggest data center investment project ever. So, like TikTok, ByteDance is one of them. We also in the market foresee some other large-scale players building their own data center as well. So that's an interesting point for data center investment. That's great for colocation service provider. It's a missed opportunity. They'd like to serve them as a colocation players. But one thing that so Kyle, we'd like to hear from you is what are their typical what are the typical demand comes from? Like, is it US, is it Chinese? And why so much? Like, it's quite strange to see 2.4 gigawatt for Thailand market itself, or is it to serve under market? So that's something we'd like to understand.
Sure. So I think from TikTok perspective is that it's definitely to service regional rather than obviously just domestic. I mean, I know there's a lot of domestic users in Thailand, but compared to the amount of investment that TikTok are putting in, we've obviously seen huge investment from TikTok, ByteDance, and Johor as well, and Batam. So it really seemed that Thailand was the next logical step for them. With regards to Chinese hyperscalers and US hyperscalers, a lot of the US hyperscalers were the early entrances into Thailand. So you see the likes of AWS and Google, they have up and operational data centers in the EEC. With regards to TikTok, is that what we're seeing is that it's definitely easier for them to potentially look at Southeast Asia for where they next want to invest. I think if you look at the whole China plus one strategy, it's not just about manufacturing. What we're really seeing is that the ease of doing business for them to enter into Southeast Asia, you look at the potential tax incentives as well that are offered. Although they're leasing, for a lot of these hyperscalers, it's the ability to have foreign ownership as well of freehold land. If you compare that to maybe Vietnam, for instance, where the land is leasehold. So you can really see that there's a big drive from the Thai government to try and encourage as much of these hyperscale, and not just hyperscale, data center investment into the country.
Okay, so it's like definitely not serving Thailand needs only. It's covering the entire Southeast Asia, but the fact that it comes over here is for some specific like frame that are more appealing than neighboring markets.
Sure. So as I mentioned, what we saw in Johor is that it's all obviously got a lot of power constraints at the moment. It really grew very quickly, and naturally, as I mentioned, they've started to come to Thailand. With regards to how much space and capacity that TikTok and ByteDance are requesting, or how many RFPs that are out in the market at the moment, we obviously don't know exactly how much capacity that they need, but we do know, as I mentioned, it is easier for them to enter into countries in Southeast Asia and maybe secure that capacity to focus on the regional aspect.
Okay, interesting. So, in Audrey, on you said so your law firm covers not just Thailand but Southeast Asia. So, which means that you have maybe seen some similarity on other markets. And what like typically these demand so big in Thailand? What is your thought about it?
I think it comes down to cost comparison, right? Availability of land. Land is, now there is a bit of an inflationary effect of all this, but initially land is more available and cheaper than in Malaysia. The regulatory framework, while it has not reached its mature stage, it's still it's easier to navigate than in Vietnam. So that's, and I think the BUI scheme and the tax incentives coming together with it are definitely an attractive factor. That's for sure. Now, when it comes to this hyperscaler, and obviously, yes, it's not just to serve Thailand, but of course, and sorry, I don't want to be the negative person in this room, but there will be a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues. You all know about the diktat, I would say, of our current world, that we really need to think about the protection of personal data, and Thailand is well equipped for a number of years now and is enforcing its legislation towards personal data protection. But this is not just Thailand, it's also Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, even Laos has the legislation on personal data protection. So for those hyperscalers who have all this data centered in Thailand, but then there will be some transfers with the neighboring countries. There are rules coming from everywhere, rules under the Thai legislation, but Thailand will not capture all the data transfer activities, and then as a processor or a controller of data, you will need to look at, okay, what will be my obligation and potentially my restriction in Vietnam, because in Vietnam you have certain localization requirement. I'm taking the example of Vietnam, but this is not just Vietnam. So you basically need to have a multi-jurisdictional analysis that will tell you, okay, this is what I can do if I want to touch on all these different countries. And that will become super complex, very interesting for legal people, but probably a technical difficulty that needs to be anticipated.
Okay, but typically for data centers operators, the data are not what they are managing, They are, as you said, it's infrastructure purely, like power and cooling, etc. So do they have to be careful of this data regulation? in regards maybe of their customer that might face some issues and that might potentially terminate a contract because data regulation laws has changed in one country, and as they are using Thailand to serve the entire Southeast Asia market, they might reconsider their plan because one regulation has changed from one country they were supposed to be served by Thailand?
That's a very good question. Again, we are getting a bit off our script. But I think, indeed, the key probably takeaway from what I will try to contribute to today's discussion is that as a data center operator, you cannot say, sorry guys, I'm only taking care of the infrastructure, all the equipment, and the business is tenants, and that's not my business. It would have high risk to do so in terms of compliance with data protection, and then we will be later talking about export control, restriction from other places of the world.
That's the next question.
The next question. But you need to have certain, even though this is not clear to what extent you might be at some point held responsible, but you need to protect yourself of the risk. So in your contract with your tenants, you need to have proper representation. You need to have a right to audit, because you cannot be 100% sure that, okay, that's not, because this is happening in the places you are operating. So the compliance, in the sense we have had to address it over the last 10, 15 years around money laundering and all these things, is now expanding to all these issues. So you need to do this due diligence. If you have your counterparty having this obligation, you want to make sure that your counterparty is compliant. So you don't have to do the detailed due diligence, but at least you want them to commit that they are compliant. So that, because it's not just about legal sanction, it's about reputational as well. Right? The reputational risk will be there at some point, because there is a commercial differentiator element into all this. We will be talking about quality standards at some point among the different data center operator. So that will be part of the of your ranking, that you take care of those things.
Sure. So, like we as a data center investor and operator, we tend to think that some of our customers are taking good care of that question, and those ones are, let's say, the ones that are in the market for ages, like typically all those big OTT and cloud providers. For those one, Han, before we step into the newcomers, AI and NCPs that we will talk about it, before we step into those, let's come back on those main customers, OTT and cloud providers. They come with like very stringent like RFP documents and very technical, intense expectations. What typically you foresee as the main 2 to 3 like key items that needs to be done technically by a data center, and typically when we look for a location, that will be also important to make sure that you cover those before you buy a land, for instance.
I think being a global hyperscaler, right, or even international type of co-location providers, right? I think all these, they probably already announced their carbon reduction targets, right, globally. So they really have to follow these targets, seriously, right? And they push this a lot to the operators, right, to see what type of energy supply they are actually utilizing, right? Of course, they want to utilize as much as renewable energy from solar, from wind, right? So this is one of the I mean, some of the requirements that required from the hyperscaler. Another thing is, of course, power, right? They want power distribution to their site from 2 diverse paths, right, from 2 different substations. But in a lot of countries, even from 2 substations, the upstream, the medium voltage, high voltage system is from the same substation. It's just connected in the ring main system, right? So they want, but basically want from 2 different substations, right? So this also incur a lot of infrastructure planning from the utility company itself, right? Of course, And the last one will be, again, now we talk power, of course, the network connectivities, right? You see a lot of time we couldn't use our mobile devices. It's not because of power failure. It's a network failure, right? So network connectivity also become very important. At least two powerful network connectivities, or 3 or 4, even some of them ask for, right? So, I mean, power you can fear because you have some on-site backup system that you can run to back up the power if there's a utility failure. But network, you can't have a on-site backup network system. It's all from the telco that coming in, right? So I see these 3 things, their sustainability targets, the power connection, the network connection is the things that they are focusing a lot from operator themselves.
Okay, understood. So typically forecasting their ability to grow for those guys is key. And then I guess there is some specific technical requirement for which you will be one of the best to answer, I guess. Kyle, now coming back on the NCPs, because that's so NCP, for those who don't know what it is like Nvidia cloud partner. So it's like some cloud providers being able to get GPUs from Nvidia and being able to install it in a data center to serve either GPU as a service, or these days we talk more about token as a service. These companies are newcomers in the market, typically because of the US export control that is happening. Like Chinese company cannot access those GPUs, and typically Nvidia cloud partners are companies that are able to buy the chips and provide GPU as a service, and ultimately some other services like tokens to these companies, because this is not forbidden by law. And so the question is, like, typically on a data center standpoint, what's sorry, as a broker, I'm pretty sure that you receive lots of demand from those companies asking for whatever supply there is in Thailand. But you are also working with data centers, and those data centers, I'm pretty sure they ask you, okay, what's the quality of this client? How can we be sure that we protect ourselves? And I said, Audrey, just before, like, it's important for a data center to make sure that their clientele is solid, because if you invest more for a client that disappear, then you put in jeopardize potentially the entire portfolio of yours, of clients. Like we have in mind something that happened in Singapore, Megaspeed, that suddenly disappeared. This is a very important point that investors see more and more as a serious issue.
Sure. So firstly, thank you for explaining NCP probably better than I could have. So everything about NCPs, I think it's important to differentiate between the different kinds of these NCPs. So firstly, if you take someone like CoreWeave, for example, if you are an investor and you're looking at data centers and someone like CoreWeave is maybe an anchor tenant, CoreWeave, for example, are backed by Goldman Sachs, by Blackstone. They have a big track record. They can maybe offer bank guarantees. If, for example, their end user, so typically with NCPs, their end users might only need it for 3 months or 6 months. So comparing to the fact that they are signing a long-term lease with the data center and then they're operating with shorter-term commitments, someone like CoreWeave has the ability to maybe provide bank guarantee, or they can say to the operator, look, this is our track record in the US, this is our track record in EMEA or APAC as well. I think the bigger risk for investors is when these NCPs don't have this track record. A lot of them are venture capitalist backed. Maybe they don't have a clear balance sheet as well. So what can they really offer as a guarantee? Ultimately, if you're an investor, regardless if you're buying data center or you're buying an industrial unit with multi-let tenants, you want to have that guarantee security. So to your point regarding Megaspeed, is that we know that if they don't have this backing, they could, worst case scenario, disappear overnight, or they default on some of their payments with their lease, which obviously has a big impact for the operator and for any investor when you're looking to exit. So really, I think it's key to make sure that these data center operators are choosing the right NCPs and not just someone who comes along and says, yes, we want to be the anchor tenant and we can commit to 10 to 20 megawatts, because you need to really focus on who are they backed by and what is their recent track record?
Great, yeah, thanks. And it's good to understand that it's also something that investors are really taking care of, because usually data centers are operating and they do the due diligence on their own. But ultimately, they need to raise fund, either equity or debt. And this is like a very important point that those investors will be looking at. Yeah. Okay. So very interesting. We'll go to the next part of the, and sorry, we need to accelerate a bit. So maybe we'll skip this one quickly. So just introducing what it was all about, but just as a reminder, what happened in Thailand over the last 12 months is huge to deal with, like in terms of natural risk and geopolitical risk. So we a bit talked about it when we talked about the NCPs typically, but that's part of the new landscape of the data center these days. They have to handle all this, and especially the geopolitical tension between the US and China is important, considering the type of demand coming in to Thailand. So, Pauline, if you don't mind, we'll just go through to the fourth part of this discussion, and then we'll keep some time for questions. But so, yeah, the last part is regarding the infrastructure constraint, and typically nowadays, that as we see that there is more and more demand popping up to Thailand, power, water, and green energy are the three main items that people will be looking at. So if you look at typically the amount of power that is expected to be built, like we're talking about 6 terawatt-hour by 2030, so it's equivalent to 2 million inhabitants of Thailand. 28 million of cubic meters per year for the water. That's more than 300,000 people usage on a yearly basis. And recently, the Thai state has announced 2 gigawatts of power, renewable power, being provided to data centers, which sounds great and exciting on the paper. Now, interesting to see how it's going to be deployed and how it's going to be implemented. So that's typically the question that we'll go through. So for the first one, Carl, we'd like to understand from your side, like how scarce is the power at the moment? Like if a new data center wants to come into Thailand, considering the pipeline that we just mentioned before, considering the fact that they need time to be delivered, is there still space for newcomers?
Sure. So when I speak to some of the big industrial developers who obviously have a lot of these hyperscalers located in, they say to me that power is not necessarily the issue, it's the timeline and how long it takes for them to actually get that up and operational and the cost to get there. So we're seeing a huge bottleneck, obviously, with how quickly the data center market in Thailand has really grown over the past few years. I think we've maybe all heard about in the market how maybe EGAT might be able to start providing some of these data center directly with power rather than necessarily going through PEA. Now, that could definitely help the bottleneck with regards to the timeline and the delays that maybe we're seeing. But from what I understand and from what I've heard is that maybe EGAT are just there to support these large hyperscalers, maybe the ones who need at least 200 megawatts. So that, if anything, is going to create a bigger gap between these large players who maybe get fast-tracked and they can get their power quicker, whereas if you're a smaller player, you're still maybe getting stuck at the bottleneck at the moment. Majority of my clients are asking me, where is the best place to get power? Where can I get it? How quickly can I get it? They're responding to RFPs where maybe the RFS is 18 months, 24 months time, but they might not even have land at this moment in time, so it's almost impossible for them to respond adequately to these RFPs. So I think, just to summarize, is that it's the timeline to get this rather than how much power Thailand actually still has available.
Understood. So very clear. And on the water side, so that's another trigger that I'm pretty sure that your client is asking you, like, I need power, I need water. What I'd like to understand also is, like, we have seen that in the past in Johor, for instance, like water was scarce, but water was even more difficult to be found. So, is there any way to avoid using so much water? And this question is for you, Han, because of course, technically speaking, that will be interesting to understand. Is there any way like water can become less of a problem? At least we could solve the one part of the equation here.
I think the market, there's still perspective of, in our ASEAN climate, which is hot and tropical, right? We need some form of water cooling, especially using water cool chill water, right? I think this mindset really have to start changing, right? I think there's 2 or 3 points which I will elaborate here, that why we need to change this mindset. First of all is that if you look at compressor technology, right? Compressor technology basically for the chill water system. Actually, compressor technology is actually evolving, right? There's turbo core compressor technology that used in air-cooled chillers that is running quite efficiently, right? And they don't utilize any water, right? So you can look at this, right? Probably you need to work with vendors to really help you to calculate, what the eventual power usage effectiveness and so on that you can achieve comparing water cooled chiller and air cooled chiller. But I'm very, very sure is that the technology for air cooled chiller is actually evolving, right? The efficiency may be slightly still behind water cooled chiller, but you look at the total PUE, right? The whole facility PUE that you include the general lighting, general power, right? And water cooled chiller, you need cooling tower pumps. Right? Look at the whole facility. I think the PUE is just the difference of about 0.05 max between water cooled chillers and air cooled chillers. Okay, this is one thing. Second thing is that a lot of operators are trying to raise their data center temperature. That means the on-rack temperature within their data centers, but still within the S3 recommended temperature of maximum of 27 degrees, right? So in some country already mandate that data center operator, your data center supply temperature must be above 25 degrees, right? Olden days, we used to run data center 18 degrees because we want to have humidity controls, right? We overcool data center because we want to control the humidity, right? But there are different type of humidity control that you can adopt for your data centers, okay? So look at, because we are raising the on-rack temperature, eventually we also can increase the chill water supply temperature. Then air-cooled chiller also can be part of the ways that actually help you to be more energy efficient and reduce usage of water, right? The third thing is the AI that's coming in, right? You heard a lot of GPUs, and GPUs don't use very cold water. You can run on GPUs. The GPU is basically running on liquid cooling, right? That means the liquid really go into the GPU, the chip itself, to cool down, right, the processing, right, and it circulate again, all right? So these GPUs are running at water temperature can be at 35 degrees, 37 degrees. Even the water that we use for showering can use, right? So this increase in water temperature, right, basically also benefit the use of just air-cooled chillers, right? And there's vendor in the market that have chillers that can operate from 20 to 35 degrees, right, without using any cooling towers and so on, just chiller itself, which is good because the same chiller you can use for your traditional air cooling system and also use for your liquid cooling system. Okay, so we can look at this. If there's also technology that use hybrid cooling, same chillers, right, but they leverage on ambient temperature, right? For example, if your data centers, as I mentioned, you are running AI data centers using water of probably 30, 35 degrees Celsius, right? You can actually leverage your ambient temperature to pre-cool the hot air. Let's say by 3 degrees or 2 degrees, right, from 30 to 27, and further reduce down to 20 degrees Celsius, right? These are hybrid cooling. It also utilizes air-cooled chillers for hybrid system, right? When the ambient temperature outside is favorable, they do a pre-cooling. If not favorable, then the compressor start running. It's also an air-cooled system, right? So you can consider all this situation, right? But the most important thing is really look at the comparison between water-cooled and air-cooled chillers, and you will be surprised that air-cooled chiller technology actually is coming close to a water-cooled technology in terms of efficiency.
Okay, very interesting. So to understand that, like typically the classic design way where water tower was the main cooling component for the heat rejection plan, can potentially be optimized these days through new technology on the cooling side, right? So potentially water could be less of an issue in the near future. Okay, interesting. Last question, and then we'll pass on to some questions in the room. Is like regarding specifically power and the new frame. So this new regulation regarding renewable energy. So here, Audrey, if you can just make a small explanation on the different frames, because honestly, even for people that are into it, it's not that easy to understand. But there is like many different things. Like recently the state announced the direct power purchase agreement, but there is also the renewable energy certificate mechanism. There is like the UGT2, sorry, which has just been released for getting power with energy credit. There is many different kinds of solution. And it sounds like also the state is doing this to secure the electricity production. So we'd like to understand a bit how it works, basically.
So what we are talking about here is not, it's more narrow than the issue of getting power. It's getting green power, because that's what the big players want. They want to be able to satisfy their global commitment. So there are 4 options in Thailand when it comes to maximizing clean supply for your data center. So the first one, which is permitted, but subject to capacity constraints, that's an on-site solar facility. So you have either directly, you own your own panel and you generate your energy from your panel, or you have a third-party provider with license to do so, come to the roof of your data center, install the solar power, and that works. That works, and that's golden standard from RE 100 perspective. And the reason it is highly valued in terms of green attributes, it's because it's guaranteed. Typically, you control, of course, if you own, you control everything. If you have your solar energy operated by a third party, you would operate under a private power purchase agreement, which typically will be at least 15 years. So you have long-term visibility. You have, in terms of economics, you do not have wheeling charge, which is a key difference with the next option. So this is one option, and that, as long as it is on-site, it's possible in Thailand from a regulatory perspective. The second option is different. That's what we call the direct PPAs, and the concept is everywhere around for 2 years now, since an EPC announcement in June 2024, with the idea that it was from the date an EPC announced, oh, that's it, it's possible. No. It has been announced, the concept is there, but then you have an entire process of analyses and different people agreeing on different things. Now, as of today, and for the purpose of today's event, I run a confirmation check with the relevant authorities, with ERC, a couple of days ago. The direct PPA scheme, so the pilot program for data centers, we are still waiting for the regulation, but the draft is there. It's reaching final stage. They are finalizing the criteria, and the committee has has presented the final proposal with the revised criteria to the NEPC for approval. So I cannot give you a date, of course, but that's coming soon. So 2,000 megawatt of energy available under that scheme, and that same benefit as for the on-site private PPAs, because we are talking about long-term purchase commitment. So that gives you visibility on your economics, on the cost to get your power. Now, from an economic perspective, there is still one variable, and I don't think it has been regulated yet, that the wheeling charge. So the wheeling charge, it's basically the price that is on the top of just what you buy, you pay for the power. It's the price that you have to pay to use the transmission system, because the difference between this option and the first option is that the source is not on site. So as buyer, I need to use the transmission system, which is owned by EGAT, so I need to pay EGAT for wheeling charge. So that's option 2. Great, not yet fully in place, but we are almost there, okay? Option 3 is UG2. So UGT2, sorry. So utility green tariff 2. 2 is because there is a variant for smaller scale consumer, and 2 is for large industrial and commercial consumer. So what does it do? So UGT2 is basically, it's almost like a direct power purchase agreement, but instead of buying it from a third party, a private, an independent power producer, you buy this from EGAT, okay? Because EGAT is not only the owner and the operator of the transmission system, they also have their own generation facilities. And they have renewable energy, they produce renewable energies themselves. So when you pay your bill to EGAT, basically what UGT2 does is that there is an addendum, and you pay to EGAT a premium on the basis of which EGAT will give you a certificate. I confirm that the power you buy is coming from a renewable energy source, which I control because that's coming from my facilities. That's what it does. And this, the tariff you pay for UGT2 is regulated, and it's under ERC, under the regulator control. It's not fixed by EGAT. So all good, it looks great. Now the issue is that it's heavily reliant on regulation. So tomorrow, someone at ERC may wake up and decide, I don't like it anymore, over. So you do not have the long-term predictability. And ERC is a further variant of that, but instead of basically buying a certificate that EGAT confirms it's coming from me, it's coming from a renewable energy source, you buy this certificate from the market. So then you have all the issue about the certification. How do you verify that this is really coming from a reliable renewable energy source? So it's usually considered to be of lower value. And it's also subject to potentially regulatory changes and less guaranteed. That's the summary.
Okay, very good, and thank you very much for this. And again, we have opened many doors on many different topics over the course of this panel. So it's now over. So if you guys have some questions, happy to take it now. We have like maybe 5 more minutes, and if you want to focus on a specific point, happy to.
Hi, Evan Chow from Nokia. So power, water, green energy. How about connectivities? Is connectivities to data centers constraints that you see?
So, for this question, that would be interesting to have Carl feedback. Don't worry, man. It's not connectivity experts that we ask you to be, but the question I think would be on: is it part of the list of items that when a data center comes into Thailand, they ask you for? Like, is it a key requirement out of all the bullet points that they will say, okay, I look for a land with this amount of power available, with this amount of water available, etc. Is there a specific demand for the connectivity, or how do they handle that part?
Sorry, I don't want to cop out of that question, but what I would say is that majority of my clients are not specifically asking about connectivity. It's power, it's water, it's land, it's tax incentives that are available to them. They're asking me which industrial estate should I be located in, which one has the best track record. But no, to answer your question, I personally am not getting asked very often about connectivity specifically.
Okay, so that's an interesting point then typically. So it means that new data center coming in, they are coming in to build a huge amount of capacity serving compute. But this compute, especially if we're talking about training for huge LLM, etc., has at some point of time to go back to the main software using it. So on this one, that's a very fair question to understand how they can get that capacity back to either China or US, depending on the type of customers it is. What we see on our side is like being very close to main highways for having access to main backbones is a critical point. So it can be sometimes part of their land due diligence while they are looking for a land close to highways because they know that main backbones will go through highways. Then there is another point to consider for a data center perspective is like the spread. We talked briefly at the beginning of the two types of data center that exist in Thailand. There is the big compute fabric for AI that are being built in EC, but there is also the data center in town, and I see some of them being here. Those data centers are made for interconnection, made for transit, internet transit, and internet exchange. Those data centers, that's the reason why today we have those data centers present at the BKNIX Peering Forum, because we are talking with telecom operator on specific deals. But I think that potentially those big guys coming in EC won't be present at the BKNIX Peering Forum because that's less of their concern. They know that their clients will take huge bandwidth contracts direct with like telecom operators, maybe one or two, that's it. They don't care about diversity of operators. They will care only about the price, the availability, and how soon they can get it.
First of all, I have to thank you, ETIC, for arranging the good panel again, as usual. Maybe I just try to add more information as our participant asked all the question about the networking. Actually, networking and connectivity is one of the checklists for the hyperscaler who will plan to come into Thailand. But Thailand is like the lucky country. We are surplus of in terms of the dark fiber in the area. So not the big issue as Pierre mentioned. But my question it will be about, we focus a lot about Bangkok and EC zone, right? Have you foresee about the new, I don't know, upcoming zone like in the down south that close to Malaysia? Because for Thailand, I think we will have more subsea cable coming into Thailand. And if you see in the, the configuration, it will be more and more to be the open access system. So it need to have, the co-working with the data center. It's not, I think it's quite a new model for Thailand because typically we build a data center for telehouse, networking, and also the hyperscaler for whatever AI data center, right? But the new data center type in the down south, it might be another type. But I'm not so sure that, have you foresee about the market trend in the southern of Thailand?
Someone want to take this one? And especially in terms of demand for data centers in border of Malaysia?
Sure. So we have definitely seen the majority of the requirements still focus on EEC, but we have had a couple of requirements asking in the south of Thailand, as you mentioned, on the border of Malaysia. I know there's more, maybe another landing cable there as well, so naturally it might make sense. There's also the land price would be considerably cheaper than if we compare it to the EEC. I think that the infrastructure, though, is not necessarily there compared to EEC, and the incentives are still very much geared towards the EEC at the moment. When you think about tax incentives, and before when I mentioned about 80% of the industrial estates being located in the EEC. So from that perspective, it's still easier, and there is still land, and there is still power, and there is still water available in the EEC. But I can definitely foresee in the future that that location might become more prevalent in some of the discussions that we're having. But I can count on one hand how many clients have asked me about that location at the moment.
And a non-technical question from my side. We talk a lot about technical land, equipment. What about people? Do we have enough people in Thailand to build and to run data center operations?
That's a fair one. Maybe, Han, you want to answer this one?
I think the skill set to run a traditional data centers is there. Right? When I say traditional data center is where servers are air-cooled servers, right? I think the skill set is there, right? It's just to grow the skills, you know, to the next generation and so on, right? But I think a lot, it's not just in Thailand, right? A lot of developing country or developed country, when this AI boom come in, right? Because the way to control cooling, right? The way to connect the cooling to the liquid cool servers is totally a different skill set, right? Which this one, not just in Thailand, a lot of countries is seeing problem with the skill set that to handle liquid cooling equipments, right? So, I mean, this is again another thing that, you know, the industry had to look at it, the data center operator working with governments, working with training institutes, right? To see whether is there any chances to actually come up with trainings, training plan, right? To scale all these people to manage operation of a liquid cool data centers, right? I think one thing good is that because I was also involved in a task force in Singapore, right? Working with Institute of Engineering Singapore, Building Construction Authority, they really foresee this lack of skill set in managing AI data centers. No? It's the same as when the EV vehicles come out in the market, right? The industry, there's no technician who know how to service an EV car because all is running on battery. We know how to service an IEC car, but EV car, there's also lack of skill set, right? So this is how the industry come together, right? Train people from training institute, from university or polytechnic technical institute. They train people that can manage EV vehicles. I think this data center for AI, especially on liquid cooling, so on, is the same. The same thing will be happening, you know, in the near few months or in a year or 2 years' time.
And maybe to complement and bouncing back on the point I made earlier with respect to compliance, and given the exposure, the potential exposure with respect to export control restrictions applicable under the US export control regulations and so on, there will be a need. And that's only an example, but there are many other risk aspects which can be framed and controlled through appropriate training. So another layer of compliance training on the top of all what international groups already implement, but that will be important to manage at the outset this risk, and I don't think that the skill set is there yet. And frankly, even for law firms operating in Thailand, this is a beginning. So, but then once it's there, if you remember a couple of years ago when we all started dealing with the PDPA, no one knew. And then it's an investment to be made for people to know what needs to be screened, and then that should be all good.
All right. So thank you very much, guys, again, our panelists, for your presence and your insights. Thank you very much. So if you can thank you them, thank you all the panelists with me for the insight they have given. So thanks very much. And we'll enjoy some drinks. So let's go for the best part of it.
Will be better. We'll do only
will do only. Yeah, on.